Hi guys, this is Anjali here. In this tutorial, I am going to teach you about the PHP filter extension. So what PHP filter extension do? PHP filters are used to validate and sanitize external input. Now what is the meaning of validate and sanitize data? Validating data determines if data is in proper form and sanitizing data removes any illegal character from the data. The PHP filter extension has many of the functions needed for checking user input and is designed to make data validation easier and quicker. So now let's understand filter extension with example. First I am writing HTML syntax. This is our HTML syntax, giving title PHP filter extension. As I mentioned that PHP extension has many functions to check user input, so let's check which functions it has. So for that, first I am writing heading that PHP filter extension offers defining table with border, defining row. In that two columns, first is filter name and second is filter ID. Now next I am defining PHP using for each loop. Instead of variable, I am defining one function which is filter underscore list. Filter underscore list function can be used to list what the PHP filter extension offers. So instead of key, I am writing ID, which is filter ID, and instead of value I am writing filter, which is variable for filter name. Now echo, defining row, in that defining two columns. First is dollar filter, which includes filter name, then closing TD, defining other TD, and writing filter underscore ID, which is predefined function to get the ID of filter name. So here our filter name is stored in filter variable. So then closing this TD and TR, semicolon is required. Now let's take a look at output. Localhost, then my folder name is tutorial, then PHP, then filter.php. You can see that these are the functions that filter extension offers, and these are the IDs for that filter functions. Now, why use filters? Many web applications receive external inputs. External input data can be user input from a form, cookies, web services data, server variables, data query results. You should always validate external data. Invalid submitted data can lead to security problems and break your web page. By using filters, you can be sure your application gets the correct input. Now next is PHP filter where function. The PHP filter where function both validate and sanitize the data. These function filters a single variable with a specified filter. It takes two pieces of data, the variable you want to check and the type of check to use. Let's sanitize string with an example. So first I am giving heading sanitize string using filter where function. So defining PHP, declaring one variable which is statement, storing one string, that welcome to tutor at desk. Now giving h2 tag. Now again declaring one variable new statement and applying filter var function, and our variable here is $statement, and to sanitize the string you need to write filter underscore sanitize underscore string. Here filter var function to remove all the HTML tags from a string statement. It means it will remove h2 tag from the statement variable. So let's print both the statement. So for that, echo string without filter function, which is $statement, and echo string with filter function. Which is stored in new statement, which removes h2 tag from the string. Now let's take a look at output. You can see that sanitize string using filter var function. In that, string without filter var function accept the h2 tag, and string with filter function is not accept h2 tag. Now next is how to validate integer with filter var function. Giving heading validate integer, defining PHP, declaring one variable $x, storing integer value 10, then check that it's an integer value or not using filter var function. So for that you need to write if filter underscore var, our variable is $x, you need to write not filter var function $x, and to validate the integer you need to write filter underscore validate underscore integer. Is equal to false. If this condition is true, then echo integer is valid, else echo integer is not valid. Let's take a look at output. You can see that it prints integer is valid because the 10 is an integer value. Now what if I write 10.5? It's a float value, so it must print integer is not valid. You can see that it prints integer is not valid, so our condition is true for that. Now next is validate an IP address, giving in heading h2 validate an IP address, defining PHP again, and then declaring one variable IP address, storing value 127.0.0.1, which is the basic syntax of IP address, and it's a default IP address for localhost. Now to check it's valid or not, you need to write if not filter extension var $IP address To validate it, you need to write filter underscore validate underscore IP is equal to false. If this condition is true, then echo IP address is valid, else echo IP address is not valid. Let's take a look at output. You can see that IP address is valid printed here. Now if I remove 0.1 from here, now let's take a look at output. You can see that IP address is not valid because it's a not valid format for IP address. Now next is validating and sanitize the email address. So for that, giving heading sanitize and validate email ID, defining PHP, declaring one variable email underscore ID, defining one email ID in that, say tutor at desk@gmail.com, which is perfect email ID format. Now first we are going to sanitize the email ID. Now for that, email ID is equal to filter underscore var. Our variable is email underscore ID. Then to sanitize email ID, you need to write filter underscore sanitize underscore email. Now first we are going to print the sanitizing email ID. So for I am writing here h2 and h2 again. What sanitize email will do? It will remove h2 tag from the our email ID variable. So print echo the sanitized email ID is, here we need to write a different variable, so I am changing it and printing here $email. Let's take a look at output. You can see that they removes h2 tag from the email variable. So it removes all the tags like angular brackets, square bracket while sanitizing email ID. Now next is how to validate an email ID. So for that you need to write if not filter where our variable is email underscore ID filter underscore validate underscore email is equal to false, then echo email ID is valid, else echo email ID is not valid. Let's take a look at output. you can see that email ID is not valid. Why? Because we need to remove this h2 tag from our email ID. Giving a br tag here for spacing. Let's take a look at output. You can see that now our email ID is valid. Now what if I remove @ from our email ID? So it must print that email ID is not valid because it's a not valid format. You can see that email ID is not valid. So now next is sanitize and validate an URL. So again giving an heading, sanitize and validate a URL, defining PHP, declaring one variable web URL, storing one URL, that https tutor@desk.com. Now to sanitizing it, declaring another variable web equals to filter underscore where $web URL and filter underscore sanitize. Instead of email I'm writing URL, and here again I'm defining h2, again h2, then echo sanitized URL is $web. Let's take a look at output. It will remove h2 tag. You can see that in our output it's already removed. Now let's validate URL. Now if not filter where $web URL then to validate it you need to write filter underscore validate URL is equal to false, then echo it's a valid URL, else echo it's not valid URL. Let's take a look at output. You can see that it's not a valid URL. So you need to remove h2 from the variable. Now let's take a look. It's a valid URL. So to make it better, I am giving br tag. Now you can see that it's a valid URL. Now what if I remove this to slash? Now it must print it's not a valid URL. So our condition is true here. That's all for filter extension. Thank you for watching this video.